I was 90% sure I was on the wrong plane, but the flight attendant had smiled so terrifyingly hard at my boarding pass that I just kept walking. Now, I was dragging 50 pounds of camera equipment down the aisle of a private luxury cabin that smelled like expensive leather and cedar, sweating profusely through my thrifted blouse. I tripped over a wildly plush rug, whispering a breathless, sorry, excuse me, to absolutely no one. Except, there was someone. He was sitting in the back, a man so unreasonably massive he made the oversized, cream-colored leather seat look like a child's booster. He was poured into a custom charcoal suit, his jaw sharp enough to cut glass, his expression a mask of pure, unadulterated stoicism. He didn't even look at me. He just tipped his head back, rigidly dry swallowing a tiny white pill with a grimace that suggested he was preparing for an execution. I hoisted my tripod case, my voice cracking entirely. Is seat 4B somewhere around? He didn't move. He didn't blink. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, wrapping around the cabin until the air literally felt hot against my skin. The sheer intimidation radiating off him was heavy enough to crush my lungs. Finally, he turned his head slowly, leaning slightly to his right, and let out a low, terrifyingly deep sigh. Ding. The pristine chime of the cabin intercom echoed, immediately swallowed by the ominous, violent rumble of thunder outside the window. Ladies and... The captain's voice cut out. The floor completely vanished beneath my feet. The plane dropped sharply, and I went completely airborne. Welcome back to Tiana's Collections. Our community is growing every single day, and I absolutely love seeing how far these stories travel. And I would love to know, where in the world are you listening from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below so we can celebrate our global park. Before we dive into the story, I want to invite you to take your support to the next level. Click that Join button below to become an official channel member. You'll unlock fantastic perks, including early access to our newest uploads before anyone else, plus exclusive loyalty badges that will make your name stand out right here in the comments section. Drop your location below, hit that Join button to grab your badges, and get comfortable. Let's get into today's story. Chapter 1. Gravity ceased to exist. 1 second, I was standing on woven wool carpeting, and the next, I was a chaotic tangle of limbs and cheap polyester hurtling through the cabin. My camera bag slipped from my shoulder, a deadly, heavy projectile, as the aircraft plunged violently toward the earth. A sharp scream tore out of my throat, quickly followed by a massive, bone-jarring thud. I didn't hit the floor. I hit a brick wall dressed in custom tailoring. My knees slammed into thighs that felt like sculpted concrete, and my hands wildly grabbed a pair of incredibly broad, tense shoulders to brace myself. The air was forcefully knocked out of my lungs, completely replaced by the overwhelming, intoxicating scent of crushed pine, expensive cologne, and a sudden, sharp spike of absolute panic. I was sitting squarely in the giant stranger's lap. "Oh my God," I gasped, instantly scrambling to get off him. My chronic need to apologize flared hotter than my adrenaline. "I am so sorry, I completely lost my balance. The plane just..." A heavy, territorial growl vibrated out of his chest, a sound so deeply primal it rattled the fillings in my back teeth. Before I could even attempt to stand, 2 massive, impossibly hot hands clamped down onto my hips like iron vices. He didn't just stop me from moving. He locked me to his lap with a terrifying display of pure, physical strength. The power disparity was immediate and suffocating. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs, a trapped bird faced with a lethal, immovable predator. "Please," I babbled, my voice shaking as I stared down at the crisp line of his lapel. "I'm moving. I promise I'm getting off you right now. Just..." He didn't loosen his grip. Instead, his massive chest heaved, his breathing suddenly ragged and shallow. He violently jerked his head forward, burying his face directly into the crook of my neck. I froze. His nose dragged against my collarbone, his sharp stubble scraping my skin in a way that sent a completely inappropriate, violently hot shiver straight down my spine. The heat radiating off his body was scorching, bleeding directly through the thin fabric of my blouse. For a wild, insane second, I thought he was smelling me. He inhaled so sharply, so deeply, that his entire massive frame shuddered against mine. I'm sorry, I whispered, my brain entirely short-circuiting under the sheer weight of his dominant hold. Are you smelling me? He didn't answer. His fingers dug tighter into my waist, his large knuckles turning white under the strain. Beneath the overwhelming, rich scent of him, I suddenly realized he was completely rigid. He wasn't breathing in my scent like some dominant king claiming his territory. He was breathing in slow, agonizing, measured gasps, fighting a completely different kind of biological battle. His stomach rumbled, not with a predator's hunger, but with the distinct, horrific gurgle of catastrophic air sickness. The terrifying billionaire was holding me hostage because if he shifted even a fraction of an inch, he was going to violently empty his stomach all over my lap. I tentatively lifted a hand, my people-pleasing instincts overriding my sheer terror as I patted his rigid shoulder. Sir, do you need a sick bag? His jaw clenched against my neck. His voice, when it finally broke, was a dark, feral, deeply strained whisper. Don't move. Chapter 2. The next 20 minutes were a masterclass in sheer, unadulterated agony. The aircraft continued its violent, shuddering descent, violently tossing us around the cabin. Through it all, the massive stranger did not loosen his grip by a single fraction of an inch. I was effectively pinned against a wall of blistering body heat and custom charcoal wool, hyper-aware of every shallow, ragged breath he took against my collarbone. His scent, a rich, intoxicating wave of cedar, dark amber, and a sharp, metallic edge of pure panic, was completely overwhelming. It wrapped around my senses, making my head spin in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with the turbulence. He was so hot. Shifters naturally ran a few degrees warmer than humans, but he felt like a literal furnace trapped in a tailored suit, his immense muscles corded tight with the effort of holding his nausea at bay. I didn't dare move. I barely dared to breathe. Every time the plane dipped, his fingers dug a little deeper into my waist, a heavy, desperate anchor in the chaos. Finally, with a bone-rattling slam and the deafening screech of tires against tarmac, the aircraft hit the runway. The collective sigh of the cabin was audible even over the roaring engines. The moment the plane slowed to a taxi, the iron grip around my waist vanished. He practically shoved me off him, his movements erratic and completely devoid of the terrifying grace he had possessed when I first boarded. I scrambled backward, tangling my feet in the plush carpeting. Thank you. Or, sorry. Both, probably. He didn't even look at me. He was too busy clutching the armrest, his skin a horrifying shade of pale green, his eyes squeezed shut as he fought a losing battle against his own biology. 20 minutes later, we were standing in the deeply depressing, fluorescent-lit terminal of what appeared to be a rural airstrip in the absolute middle of nowhere. The linoleum floors were peeling, the air smelled faintly of stale popcorn and floor wax, and the only other person in the room was a deeply bored ticketing agent chewing aggressively on a piece of pink bubble gum. Floofzilla, I had learned his name from a very panicked flight attendant, was attempting to salvage his ruined pride. He marched up to the counter, his massive frame completely dwarfing the flimsy plastic barrier. He planted his large hands on the laminate surface, leaning forward in a textbook display of primal, territorial dominance. "I need a private car," Floofzilla growled, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that should have made the agent tremble in terror. "A black SUV, tinted windows. I need it fueled and waiting outside in exactly—" He abruptly stopped talking. His broad chest heaved, and he had to clench his jaw so tightly the muscles leaped beneath his skin, desperately swallowing down the lingering nausea from the flight. The ticketing agent popped her gum, entirely unimpressed by the towering, aggressively gorgeous man currently fighting for his life. "We don't have private black SUVs, sir. This is a regional strip. We have a shuttle bus that goes to the Holiday Inn, and whatever is left at the rental kiosk." Floofzilla's eyes narrowed, a flash of pure predatory irritation breaking through his sickly pallor. I am the CEO of the East Coast pact conglomerate. I do not ride shuttle buses. Find me a vehicle. Now. He tried to punctuate the command with another menacing growl, but it came out as a weak, breathless wheeze. He actually swayed on his feet, his massive hand gripping the edge of the counter for support. My chronic people-pleasing syndrome violently kicked in. I couldn't watch this anymore. He looked like he was going to either murder the agent or pass out directly onto the linoleum. I shoved my way past his massive shoulder, flashing the agent the most desperate, placating smile I could muster. "Hi, I am so sorry about him," I babbled, entirely ignoring the dark, warning glare Floofzilla shot at the side of my head. "He's a very nervous flyer. Terrible motion sickness. It's a whole thing. Look at him, he's practically green. He really just needs a car. Any car. Please. We are completely desperate, and I will personally write a glowing review for this airport on every travel website I can find." The agent looked at Floofzilla's pale, sweaty face, then looked at my frantic, apologetic expression. A wave of profound pity washed over her features. "All right, honey," she sighed, typing lazily on her keyboard. "I'll give you the last rental we've got, but I'm warning you it's not a black SUV." Floofzilla closed his eyes, exhaling a long, shuddering breath. "I don't care. Just give us the keys so I can get out of this fluorescent purgatory." The agent handed me a single plastic key with a bright yellow tag. Lot B, space 12. I looked at the key, then up at the terrifyingly massive man beside me. The realization hit me like a physical blow. There were no private cars, no luxury escorts. We were completely, hopelessly stranded together. The baggage claim area was a desolate cavern of concrete and exposed pipes, dominated by a single, terrifyingly loud luggage carousel. It didn't just turn, it ground forward with an obnoxious, rhythmic squeak that echoed off the high ceiling like nails on a chalkboard. Squeak, grind. Squeak, grind. I stood approximately 4 feet away from Floofzilla, the air between us thick with a heavy, awkward tension. Now that his stomach had settled slightly on solid ground, the terrifying alpha aura had returned in full force. He stood with his feet planted shoulder-width apart, his posture rigidly perfect, his hands clasped behind his back like a general surveying a deeply disappointing battlefield. Even standing completely still, he was an overwhelming physical presence. His body ran so hot that I could practically feel the warmth radiating off his skin, carrying that heavy, intoxicating scent of cedar and dark amber straight into my lungs. It was making my mind foggy, blurring the edges of my panic with a strange, heavy wash of heat. "So," I began, my voice practically echoing in the empty room. "We have the car key. We just need to grab our bags and figure out where we're actually going." Floofzilla didn't move. He didn't even twitch. He just continued to stare blankly ahead at the empty rubber belt. I frowned, shuffling a little closer to his left side. He was so tall I had to tilt my head entirely back to see his profile. "Are you waiting on a lot of luggage? Because I have 3 bags, and one of them is highly fragile." Nothing. Not a blink, not a muscle movement. My anxiety spiked. Was he ignoring me to assert dominance? Was this a weird shifter power play to remind me of my place? I chewed on my bottom lip, my hands wringing the strap of my purse. I couldn't afford for him to just abandon me here. I needed his corporate connection to save my studio, and frankly, I needed a ride out of this town. "Look," I said, my voice rising slightly in pitch as I spoke directly to his left profile. "I know this isn't ideal, but I really need to make sure my gear survives this trip. I have a massive case coming down the chute, and it weighs almost 60 pounds. It's completely awkward to carry." I took a breath, letting my people-pleasing mask slip just a fraction. "Can you handle my heavy equipment for me?" Floofzilla violently flinched. His entire massive body went completely rigid, his broad shoulders snapping back as if he had been physically struck. He turned his head so fast I heard his neck pop. His eyes, previously a cool, stoic brown, were suddenly blown wide. His pupils dilated so heavily they swallowed his irises entirely. He looked down at me, his chest rising and falling in heavy, erratic surges. The heat rolling off him suddenly spiked, the scent of cedar darkening into something rich, heavy, and wildly primal. "Excuse me?" he rumbled, the vibration of his voice hitting me squarely in the chest. "My heavy equipment," I repeated, completely baffled by his sudden, intense reaction. I gestured vaguely toward the empty carousel. "It's really long and incredibly heavy, and I usually struggle to get it positioned right. I just need you to handle it for a few minutes until we get to the car." Floofzilla inhaled sharply through his teeth. A deep, territorial sound began to build in the back of his throat. He took a single, predatory step toward me, closing the distance completely. He was so close I could feel the heat of his breath on my forehead. "You want me?" he whispered, his voice dark and dripping with a sudden, suffocating intensity. "To handle your equipment." "Yes?" I squeaked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Why are you looking at me like that? It's just a tripod case." The deep, rumbling growl in his chest completely died. Floofzilla blinked. Once. Twice. The heavy, primal arousal in his eyes vanished, instantly replaced by a look of profound, world-shattering confusion. He leaned down slightly, tilting his right ear toward my face. "What did you just say?" I took a deep breath and shouted directly into his right ear. "I asked if you could carry my camera tripod because it is heavy." The silence that followed was agonizing. Floofzilla slowly straightened up. A furious, dark flush crept up the back of his thick neck, staining his ears bright red. He stared at me for 3 agonizing seconds, realizing with horrifying clarity that he had just entirely misinterpreted a simple request as a highly graphic, incredibly spicy proposition. He had completely misheard me because of his bad left ear. He cleared his throat, his jaw locking into a stoic glare that was betrayed by the violent blush on his neck. "Of course," he said stiffly, staring resolutely at the ceiling. "I can handle the tripod." The neon-green 4-cylinder hatchback sat alone in Lot B, glowing under the afternoon sun like a radioactive lime. It was, without question, the smallest, most pathetic vehicle I had ever seen in my life. It looked like a roller skate with doors. Floofzilla stood in front of it, his designer garment bag slung over one massive shoulder, staring at the tiny car with a look of absolute homicidal betrayal. "This is a joke," he said quietly, his voice dangerously level. "This is a physical impossibility. I cannot fit my mass inside that plastic container." "It's not that bad," I lied smoothly, unlocking the doors with a pathetic, high-pitched chirp of the key fob. "It has wheels. It has a steering wheel. It's fine. You're just being dramatic." Floofzilla shot me a withering glare that could have melted steel. Without another word, he aggressively yanked open the driver's side door and attempted to get in. It was a completely humiliating spectacle. He had to bend completely in half, ducking his head to clear the doorframe, only to immediately jam his broad shoulders against the ceiling. He contorted his long, muscular legs, trying to slide them under the steering wheel, but his knees violently cracked against the cheap plastic dashboard. He looked like a giant, very angry bear trying to crawl into a mailbox. "Just scoot the seat back," I suggested helpfully, climbing into the passenger side with ease. Floofzilla reached down, violently yanking the lever under the seat. He shoved backward, but the seat only moved half an inch before letting out a sad, metallic clunk. "It is back!" he ground out, his voice tight with suppressed rage. His knees were practically pressed against his chin. His massive left bicep was pressed entirely against my right shoulder. The car was so incredibly small that our bodies were forced together in the center console, stripping away any illusion of personal space. The heat rolling off his body was immediate and suffocating. It filled the tiny cabin instantly, bringing with it that heavy, intoxicating wave of dark cedar. My heart rate immediately spiked. I tried to press myself flat against the passenger door, but it was useless. Every time he breathed, his chest brushed my arm. "All right," he muttered, aggressively turning the ignition. The engine sputtered to life with a pathetic, wheezing cough. Just turn on the air conditioning. I need to cool down. I reached for the climate control dial, twisting it all the way to maximum cooling. The vent blasted a violent gust of lukewarm, damp air directly into my face. It smelled faintly of old gym socks and cheap pine air freshener. I waited 10 seconds, 20 seconds. The air only got hotter. I said softly, staring at the vents. I think the AC is broken. Floofzilla slowly turned his head to look at me, his face a portrait of suppressed agony. The temperature in the tiny cabin was already skyrocketing, fueled entirely by his intense shifter body heat. The close proximity was becoming unbearable. The air felt thick, heavy, and undeniably spicy. I could feel the tension humming beneath his skin, a coiled spring ready to snap. Don't speak, he ordered softly, his voice strained as he shifted the car into drive. His massive hand completely engulfed the tiny gear shift. Just don't speak. Let me drive. I just need silence. He hit the gas pedal. As he shifted his foot, his knee slammed violently against the center console, directly hitting the radio dial. The speakers erupted in a deafening, booming blast of aggressively cheesy romantic pop music. A booming bass line rattled the cheap plastic doors, accompanied by a ridiculously upbeat, high-pitched vocal belting out lyrics about eternal love and holding hands. Floofzilla violently flinched, his hands flying to the dashboard to shut it off. He aggressively punched the power button. Nothing happened. He slammed his palm against the volume dial, trying to twist it down, but the plastic knob completely popped off, rolling uselessly onto the floor mat. The music blasted louder, an unbearable, cheerful soundtrack to our suffocatingly tense, intensely hot, and completely disastrous road trip. The blistering pop music had mercifully blown out the right speaker somewhere around mile 50, leaving us with a crackling, muffled bass line that vaguely resembled an erratic heartbeat. The sun had finally surrendered, plunging the highway into a deep, ink-blue darkness. The tiny cabin of the hatchback was a veritable oven. With the air conditioning permanently deceased, the atmosphere had thickened into a heavy, suffocating soup of artificial pine and the overwhelming, intoxicating spice of Floofzilla's body heat. We were packed so tightly that every time he shifted his massive foot from the gas to the brake, his outer thigh flexed directly against my hip. To combat the paralyzing, suffocating tension, I had done the only thing I knew how to do. I talked. I babbled. I narrated the entire history of my failed photography business, the precise reasons why I hated using flash outdoors, and delivered a highly detailed critique of the highway's reflective paint. Floofzilla hadn't said a word in 3 hours. He just stared intensely at the road, his jaw locked, his knuckles white on the flimsy plastic steering wheel. And honestly, I mumbled, my eyelids growing incredibly heavy as the hypnotic hum of the tires worked its magic. If you really look at a seagull, they're just pigeons with a coastal aesthetic. You know? Go to sleep, Boowolf, he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that sent a violent, completely uncalled-for shiver down my spine. Not sleeping, I slurred, my head drooping. Just resting my corneas. I couldn't help it. The sheer exhaustion of the plane crash, the adrenaline spike, and the sweltering heat dragged me under. My head lolled sideways, slipping off the edge of the passenger seat and landing squarely against the hard plastic of the center console, right beside his shifting arm. I drifted into a heavy, dark sleep, anchored only by the immense, scorching heat radiating from the man beside me. Sometime later, hours, maybe minutes, I vaguely registered a change in the car's atmosphere. The terrible, rattling hum of the tiny 4-cylinder engine was being drowned out by something else. Something deeper. It was a rhythmic, incredibly heavy vibration. Thrum, thrum, thrum. It reverberated through the cheap plastic of the center console, traveling directly into my cheekbone and rattling the loose change in the cup holder. The sound was overwhelmingly rich, a bone-deep resonance that felt like a massive diesel engine idling under a thick wool blanket. but it wasn't coming from beneath the hood. It was coming from Floofzilla's chest. The sound washed over me, strangely hypnotic. It carried a fierce, instinctual weight, a biological declaration of safety, of absolute, terrifying comfort. My subconscious latched onto it, pulling me deeper into the heavy, cedar-scented warmth of his space. I slowly blinked my eyes open, the darkness of the cabin disorienting me. The heavy rhythm was so loud it was visibly vibrating the water bottle in the side door. I shifted groggily, lifting my head from the console and looking over at him. His eyes were fixed on the empty, moonlit road, his expression completely relaxed for the first time since we met. His chest was expanding and contracting with that deep, rolling vibration. "Floofzilla?" I whispered, my voice thick with sleep. "Is the engine knocking?" The heavy, resonant vibration cut off so abruptly it was like a plug had been pulled. Floofzilla rigidly slammed on the brakes, pulling the hatchback onto the gravel shoulder with a violent crunch. He threw the car into park, his entire massive frame locking up in pure, unadulterated horror. He choked, his eyes wide and completely terrified as he stared out the windshield. The fierce, terrifying billionaire was clutching the steering wheel like it was a life preserver. "No, because it sounded really weird just now," I murmured, rubbing my eyes. "Like a giant cat." "We are stopping," he declared, his voice cracking entirely as a dark, violent flush completely consumed his neck and ears. The Twilight Rest bed breakfast was an architectural nightmare that looked like it had been violently expelled from the 1970s. The neon sign buzzed with an angry, flickering red light, illuminating a lobby that was aggressively decorated with ruffled lace doilies and, I am not exaggerating, dozens of hollow-eyed porcelain dolls. I stood in the doorway of room 4, clutching my brass room key and staring into the abyss. "Well," I said weakly, "it has 4 walls." Floofzilla ducked under the doorframe, bringing his imposing, cedar-scented presence into the tiny, floral wallpapered room. The space instantly shrank. He dwarfed the flimsy dresser, his broad shoulders practically brushing the outdated popcorn ceiling. He slowly turned his gaze toward the center of the room. There was only one bed. It was a deeply questionable antique full-size mattress resting on a spindly dark wood frame that looked older than the American Revolution. It sagged sadly in the middle, covered by a fiercely ugly patchwork quilt. "Absolutely not!" Floofzilla snarled, the mortification of his earlier car purring instantly evaporating into fierce, territorial outrage. "I am not sleeping on that hazard." "It's not a hazard, it's just rustic," I sighed, dropping my heavy camera bag onto the floral carpet with a dull thud. "And it's the only room left for 50 miles. Just test it out. It might be memory foam under there." Floofzilla shot me a look of pure, withering disdain. But ever the accommodating, stoic martyr, he marched over to the edge of the bed. He turned, carefully bracing his massive thighs, and slowly lowered his dense weight onto the mattress. The descent took exactly 3 seconds. For a moment, nothing happened. Floofzilla sat rigidly on the edge, glaring at the lace curtains. Then, crack. The sound was like a gunshot. The ancient wooden frame violently splintered under his sheer mass. The left side of the bed spectacularly caved in, sending the mattress, the ugly quilt, and the towering executive crashing sideways onto the carpet in a chaotic tangle of wood and springs. Silence descended upon room 4, broken only by the sad twang of a loose metal coil vibrating against the floorboards. Floofzilla was completely motionless, half buried in the mattress, staring blankly at the popcorn ceiling. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted copper, desperately trying to suppress the hysterical, inappropriate laugh bubbling in my throat. "So, not memory foam then." He slowly closed his eyes, his massive hands gripping the ruined quilt. "I will buy this entire establishment tomorrow and burn it to the ground." "Okay, Godzilla, let's be rational," I breathed, walking over to the closet. I yanked out a scratchy, thin wool blanket and a deeply suspicious flat pillow. "The bed is dead, which means I'm taking the floor." Floofzilla's eyes snapped open. He sat up amidst the wreckage, scattering splinters of antique pine, his jaw ticking wildly. You will do no such thing. Floofzilla, the bed is a crime scene. I'm not sleeping in that crater, I countered, tossing the blanket onto the surprisingly clean patch of carpet near the window. I'll be fine. You are a human, he growled, the vibration low and deeply protective, his biological instincts violently rejecting the entire scenario. He stood up, shaking off the ruined mattress like a very angry, bespoke-suited bear. You are fragile, you need elevation, support. I'm a photographer, not a Fabergé egg, I shot back, dropping to my knees to smooth out the blanket. Before I could even blink, a massive, impossibly hot hand closed around my upper arm. He didn't hurt me, but the sheer, overwhelming strength was undeniable. With a single, effortless tug, Floofzilla hoisted me off the floor and planted me squarely on my feet, his chest heaving with frustrated, primal tension. You are not sleeping on the floor, he ordered softly, his dark eyes burning into mine, his face inches away. The fluorescent lights of the twilight rest breakfast nook flickered aggressively, illuminating a deeply depressing spread of stale pastries and lukewarm carafes. I sat at a tiny, wobbly laminate table, clutching a tiny styrofoam cup of black coffee like it was a lifeline. I hadn't slept. Floofzilla had refused to let me sleep on the floor, and I had refused to sleep in the crater of the broken bed. The stalemate had resulted in an agonizingly long night where I eventually passed out sitting up against the wall, while Floofzilla stood absolute guard by the door like a gargoyle in a ruined suit. Now, his biological clock had apparently decided it was time to shift from protect to provide. I watched, utterly bewildered, as the terrifying executive systematically dismantled the motel breakfast buffet. He moved with a hyper-focused, predatory grace, aggressively hoarding the limited resources. He elbowed past an elderly trucker to seize the serving tongs, his jaw tight with pure, instinctual purpose. What is he doing? I muttered into my coffee. A minute later, Floofzilla marched back to our tiny table. The sheer physical presence of the man forced a nearby family to awkwardly shift their chairs away. He didn't sit down. Instead, he reached out and slammed a terrifyingly large plastic plate directly in front of me. It was a mountain of meat. There had to be 30 strips of rubbery, microwaved bacon, at least a dozen sad, gray sausages, a violently yellow pile of powdered scrambled eggs. It was an offensive, cholesterol-laden monument to primal courting instincts. Floofzilla stood over me, his massive chest rising and falling, his eyes locked onto mine with a dark, brooding intensity. The message was clear. I have hunted for you. I have provided. Consume. Floofzilla, I said slowly, staring at the sheer volume of sodium in front of me. What is this? Breakfast? He stated. His voice was completely flat, but I could hear the faint, desperate undertone of a man whose inner biology was demanding I praise his hunting skills. This isn't breakfast, I breathed. This is a heart attack on a paper plate. Did you leave anything for the other guests? They are irrelevant, he growled, leaning forward slightly, the intoxicating scent of dark cedar cutting right through the smell of cheap grease. You need protein. You did not sleep. You are expending energy. Eat. I looked at the massive, terrifying man. He looked utterly exhausted, his bespoke suit completely wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes, and yet he was staring at this plate of garbage meat like he had personally taken down a stag with his bare hands just for me. It was incredibly weird. It was overwhelming. It was also somehow the most endearing thing anyone had ever done for me. My chest tightened with a sudden, confusing rush of affection. But my modern human digestive system absolutely rejected his biological offering. I reached across the wobbly table, completely ignoring the mountain of bacon. I picked up a small, slightly squished blueberry muffin wrapped in plastic and slid it smoothly across the table until it bumped against his massive knuckles. He looked down at the muffin, then back at me, profound confusion twisting his sharp features. I am not eating 3 pounds of sad sausage, Floofzilla, I said, my voice gentle but entirely firm. You need to eat your feelings. Sit down, unwrap the muffin, and eat it. His jaw clenched. His instincts violently protested the rejection of his hunt. The air in the tiny breakfast room suddenly felt incredibly heavy, a thick, spicy tension rolling off his broad shoulders. He looked like he was deciding whether to flip the table or devour the muffin in one bite just to prove a point. He stared at me, unblinking. You are rejecting my provision. I am rejecting food poisoning, I corrected smoothly, tapping the plastic wrapper. Eat the muffin, Alpha. The absolute sheer audacity of my command hung in the air. Floofzilla's pupils blew wide, swallowing his irises entirely as he registered my tone. For 3 agonizing seconds, I thought I had pushed the billionaire too far. Instead, his broad chest shuddered with a heavy, deeply put-upon sigh. He reached across the laminate table, his massive fingers delicately pinching the crinkly plastic wrapper. Never breaking his dark, brooding eye contact, he unwrapped the tiny blueberry pastry and shoved the entire thing into his mouth in one aggressive, terrifying bite. 10 minutes later, I pushed open the flimsy door to room 4 to grab our bags, fueled by the minor victory of domesticating a wild apex predator with a baked good. I stopped dead in the doorway. Floofzilla was standing next to the ruined, splintered bed frame. He was holding my primary camera body, the expensive one. The one that cost more than 3 months of my studio rent. But he wasn't inspecting the settings. He was unconsciously, methodically rubbing the sharp line of his stubbled jaw directly against the matte black plastic of my 72mm telephoto lens. Squeak. Rub. Squeak. Floofzilla! I gasped, dropping my coffee cup directly into the wastebasket. He violently flinched, nearly dropping the camera. He snapped to attention, his eyes wide and completely blown out with that heavy, primal darkness. A thick, intoxicating wave of dark cedar crashed over the room, heavy enough to taste on the back of my tongue. "What are you doing to my equipment?" I demanded, marching forward. My fear of confrontation completely evaporated, entirely eclipsed by the protective fury of a broke artist defending her livelihood. "Are you rubbing your face on my lens?" Floofzilla swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing sharply against his thick throat. A violent dark flush crept up his neck. It smelled wrong. "It smelled like a camera!" I shouted, snatching the heavy piece of machinery out of his massive hands. I furiously polished the plastic with the hem of my blouse. "It is not a fire hydrant. You cannot just wipe your face on things because you feel territorial. That is a $2,000 piece of glass, you absolute menace." The silence in the tiny motel room was deafening. I froze, the adrenaline suddenly draining from my veins. I had just yelled. I had aggressively, unapologetically yelled at the notoriously ruthless CEO of the East Coast pact conglomerate. I braced myself for the bone-rattling roar, the lethal display of alpha dominance that was surely coming. Floofzilla stared down at me. His broad chest heaved, the heat radiating off his body turning the small room into a sauna. He lowered his chin, his massive shoulders slumping the tiniest fraction of an inch. "You are right," he rumbled softly, his voice thick with profound, startling submission. I was acting on feral instinct. "I apologize. Boowolf." My jaw practically hit the floral carpet. The sheer, overwhelming power trip of scolding the terrifying king of the East Coast and winning sent a completely inappropriate, violently hot thrill straight down my spine. "Just," I stammered, pointing a shaking finger at his chest. "Don't do it again." "Understood," he whispered, stepping impossibly close. He tilted his head, his voice dropping into a dark, intimate register. "But I make no promises regarding the passenger seat." 2 hours later, my cell phone screen flickered, desperately flashed a low battery warning, and completely died. The digital map vanished into a featureless black void. "Okay," I sighed, tossing the useless brick into the cup holder of the neon green hatchback. "We are officially flying blind. We need to pull over and buy a paper map, or at least ask someone at a gas station for directions to the interstate." Floofzilla's hands flexed on the cheap plastic steering wheel. Absolutely not. I do not ask for directions. I have innate directional awareness. Floofzilla, you are a CEO, not a homing pigeon. I am a predator, Boowolf, he growled, entirely serious as the tiny engine wheezed under his heavy foot. I can track magnetic north. I can hear the distant hum of the 18-wheelers on the highway. I merely need to listen to the topography. Before I could point out the absolute absurdity of that statement, he forcefully rolled down his driver's side window. The oppressive, hot afternoon wind immediately blasted into the tiny cabin. Floofzilla turned his head slightly to the left, squinting into the sunlight, attempting to let his heightened senses guide us through the winding rural backroads. I sat in suffocating silence, the heavy scent of his cedar and amber swirling fiercely in the cramped space, mixing with the smell of hot asphalt. He took a sharp left, then another left, then a deeply aggressive right turn onto a gravel road that did not look remotely like a state highway. Floofzilla, I murmured. Quiet, he commanded softly, his brow furrowed in intense concentration. The vibration of the asphalt is increasing. We are approaching a major junction. The gravel road ended abruptly. Floofzilla slammed on the brakes, the hatchback skidding to a pathetic, dusty halt. We were not at a major junction. We were parked directly in front of a giant, brightly painted wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Farmer Bob's Family Petting Zoo." A goat, standing on top of a picnic table, let out a piercing, frantic bleat. Floofzilla stared at the goat through the windshield. The goat stared back. The profound, crushing silence in the tiny car was broken only by the pathetic sputtering of the four-cylinder engine. Floofzilla's jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might shatter. "Your left ear," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a ton of bricks. "You turned your bad ear toward the window. Your spatial awareness is completely ruined." Floofzilla closed his eyes, exhaling a long, shuddering breath that completely fogged his side of the glass. The alpha facade shattered into a million tiny, humiliated pieces. I thought I smelled diesel exhaust. It was livestock. "Well," I said brightly, trying desperately not to laugh at the terrifying billionaire who had just been out-navigated by a petting zoo. "The summit gala starts in exactly 4 hours. We are lost in the suburbs, covered in motel dust, and driving a radioactive lime. When we finally show up, your rivals are going to eviscerate you." "They will attempt to use this against me," he agreed, his voice a low, dangerous vibration that completely ignored the goat currently licking the hood of our car. He slowly turned to face me, his dark eyes locking onto mine with a sudden, suffocating intensity. Unless what?" I breathed, my heart rate spiking at the sudden, heavy heat rolling off him. "Unless we control the narrative," he murmured, leaning over the center console until his face was inches from mine. "We arrived late because we were distracted by each other. An uncontrollable, completely consuming infatuation." My breath hitched. "You want to fake date?" "I want to walk into that summit with my hand around your waist," he corrected, his voice dropping an octave, "and make them believe I am so utterly obsessed with you that I completely lost track of time. Can you do that, Boowolf?" I swallowed hard, staring at his perfect, sharp lips. "Yes." "Good," he growled, shifting the car into reverse. "Then we need to practice." The gas station was bathed in the harsh, flickering glow of fluorescent canopy lights. I stood by the rear bumper of the tiny green car, stretching my legs, trying to regulate my breathing while Floofzilla pumped gas. "So," I began, nervously twisting the strap of my purse. "If someone asks how we met, we say I was hired for a corporate shoot at your headquarters and we just hit it off?" "Too casual," Floofzilla muttered, his gaze fixed intensely on the digital numbers ticking upward on the pump. He looked ridiculously out of place, a towering monument of bespoke tailoring standing next to a dingy trash can. "I am not a casual man," I would not hit it off. I would see you, realize you were mine, and aggressively court you. Okay, dial back the caveman, I laughed, the sound slightly breathless. We need to be believable, not terrifying. Hey there! A teenager wearing a violently red gas station polo shirt ambled out of the convenience store, holding a squeegee. He had floppy hair and a deeply misplaced sense of swagger. He completely ignored the massive, terrifying man holding the fuel nozzle and walked straight up to me. Need the windows washed, gorgeous? He asked, leaning casually against the back window of our sad rental car. He winked. He actually, literally winked at me. The temperature in the immediate vicinity plummeted, and simultaneously, the heavy, spicy scent of crushed pine spiked so sharply it practically burned my sinuses. Floofzilla slowly released the fuel handle. He didn't yell. He didn't say a word. He simply turned around, drawing his massive frame up to its full, staggering height. The sheer, physical threat radiating from him was a tangible force. He stared at the teenager with a look of such absolute, lethal possession that the kid physically recoiled, the squeegee slipping from his grip and clattering onto the concrete. The teenager stammered, suddenly realizing he had just hit on a woman guarded by an apex predator. I'll just go check the sodas. He practically sprinted back into the store. I stared at Floofzilla, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. The fake jealousy was incredibly convincing. In fact, it was terrifyingly convincing. That was a bit much for a practice run, don't you think? I whispered, my voice shaking slightly as he slammed the fuel door shut. Floofzilla didn't answer. He stalked past me, his jaw locked, his eyes burning with a dark, feral intensity. He marched straight into the convenience store. Through the glass, I watched in absolute bewilderment as the billionaire CEO of the East Coast Pact conglomerate walked to the snack aisle, grabbed an empty shopping basket, and systematically began sweeping every single bag of beef jerky off the shelves into his basket. He slammed the overflowing basket onto the counter. The teenager behind the register looked like he was about to cry as the credit card machine let out a frantic, aggressive beep, beep, beep. Floofzilla walked out carrying 2 massive plastic bags filled entirely with cured meats. He shoved them into the back seat of the tiny car, then turned to face me. His chest was heaving. Get in the car, he commanded softly, the vibration low and deeply territorial. I slid into the passenger seat, the suffocating heat of the cramped cabin instantly enveloping me. Floofzilla folded himself behind the wheel, slamming the door shut. The silence was deafening, thick with a heavy, unspoken desire that made the air completely unbreathable. Floofzilla, I murmured, staring at his white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. That wasn't fake, was it? He slowly turned his head. The look in his dark eyes was so raw, so violently possessive, it entirely stripped away the illusion of our little arrangement. No, he breathed, leaning across the center console until his mouth was a fraction of an inch from my ear. It wasn't. The word hung in the humid, stagnant air of the hatchback, heavy and suffocating. The terrifying weight of his confession wrapped around my ribs, squeezing the breath right out of my lungs. I desperately needed oxygen. Most of all, I needed to not be trapped in a metal box with a billionaire who was looking at my mouth like it was his last meal. Pull over, I choked out, aggressively pointing at a wrought iron gate approaching on our right. There, the Municipal Botanical Gardens. Pull over right now, or I am going to hyperventilate. Floofzilla didn't argue. He wrenched the steering wheel, throwing the tiny car into the gravel parking lot. 10 minutes later, we were entirely swallowed by a towering labyrinth of frosted glass and overgrown vegetation. The greenhouse was a sweltering, misty jungle. Giant, waxy monsteras brushed against our shoulders, and the suffocating perfume of night-blooming jasmine and damp earth completely overwhelmed the air. For a human, it was aggressively muggy. For a shifter with a hypersensitive biological radar, it was pure sensory overload. I marched backward down a narrow, moss-covered cobblestone path, lifting my camera to my eye. Okay, just stand by that giant fern. Look casual, like you aren't currently hoarding $80 of smoked meats in your trunk. Through the viewfinder, I watched him stiffen. Floofzilla was completely out of his element. Stripped of his boardroom and acute tracking, he looked beautifully, dangerously unmoored. The overpowering floral stench was completely masking his environmental awareness. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, aggressively tugging at the collar of his ruined dress shirt. A single bead of sweat rolled down his sharp throat, catching the hazy greenhouse light. I cannot hear the perimeter. I cannot smell anything but aggressive, suffocating petunias. "They're orchids," I corrected, lowering the heavy camera. "And you don't need a perimeter. We are in a municipal plant sanctuary. You just need to relax your jaw." He let out a deeply frustrated breath and took a slow, predatory step forward. "Boowolf!" "Stop pacing," I scolded, taking a hasty step back, hyper-aware of the shrinking distance. "You're ruining the lighting. Your shadow is entirely blocking the—" My heel caught the slick edge of a cobblestone. I stumbled backward, my arms flailing wildly as gravity betrayed me. Floofzilla moved with blinding speed. Before I could hit the ground, a massive, scorching hot arm banded tightly around my waist, violently jerking me forward. I slammed directly into his chest. His momentum carried us backward, pressing my spine firmly against the damp brick wall of a planter box. I was entirely caged by his imposing frame. The humid, rhythmic drip of condensation echoed from the glass ceiling. His chest was heaving against mine, the heat rolling off him so intense it singed my damp skin. He ducked his head, completely bypassing my personal space, his lips hovering a terrifying fraction of an inch from my collarbone. "You are chronically clumsy," he whispered, the deep vibration of his voice sinking straight into my bones. You startled me," I breathed, my hands automatically rising to grip his solid shoulders. The unspoken tension between us finally reached a screeching, unbearable crescendo. His dark eyes dragged slowly up to my mouth. He leaned in, the heavy spice of his amber scent piercing through the thick floral fog. He was going to kiss me. "Hey!" A scratchy, furious voice barked from the foliage, completely shattering the electric silence. "Get your giant shoes off my award-winning cymbidiums." The neon green hatchback officially flatlined on the edge of a deeply terrifying, densely wooded national park. The engine gave one final, pathetic wheeze before the dashboard lights died entirely. To make matters infinitely worse, the sky immediately split open, unleashing a torrential, freezing downpour. Within 20 minutes, we were completely soaked, shivering, and crammed inside a flimsy emergency pop-up tent that Floofzilla had aggressively wrestled out of the trunk. It was pitch black inside the nylon dome. The violent drum of the rain against the thin fabric masked the sounds of the forest, isolating us in a tiny, freezing bubble. I sat cross-legged on my damp jacket, my teeth chattering uncontrollably. Beside me, the terrifying CEO was completely silent. Stripped of his custom tailoring, shivering in a ruined dress shirt, he suddenly felt overwhelmingly human. The unshakable corporate facade had entirely washed away in the mud. "Floofzilla?" I whispered, the darkness emboldening me. "Are you okay?" He exhaled a jagged, trembling breath. "I am going to lose my position, Boowolf." The raw, hollow defeat in his voice was devastating. It completely lacked his usual commanding resonance. I shifted closer, guided blindly by the intense, damp heat radiating from his massive shoulders. "Because we're late?" "Because I am defective," he corrected bitterly, the confession ripping out of him like jagged glass. "A multi-pack summit requires a leader who projects absolute, infallible dominance. They will test my perimeter awareness. They will test my reflexes, and the moment they realize my left ear is completely dead, that I cannot track a threat, that a commercial flight leaves me violently incapacitated." He swallowed hard, the sound loud in the tiny space. "They will vote me out. I am a liability to my own conglomerate." The crushing weight of his vulnerability hung in the damp air. This massive, intimidating man, who commanded boardrooms and terrified gas station attendants, was utterly paralyzed by the fear of his own biological imperfections. He had built an empire on a lie of physical invincibility. My chronic people-pleasing instincts vanished, instantly replaced by a fierce, protective ache in my chest. I didn't want the perfect stoic leader. I wanted the man who purred in his sleep and aggressively hoarded breakfast meats for me. I reached out into the pitch black, my cold fingers brushing against his soaked collar. I traced the sharp line of his jaw, feeling the rigid tension locked in his muscles. I didn't say a word. I simply leaned forward, blindly finding the side of his face in the dark. I pressed my lips softly against his damp skin, right beneath his left ear, his bad ear, his greatest source of shame. "I don't care," I whispered, pouring every ounce of fierce certainty into my voice. "You aren't defective. You're just you, and that is more than enough." Floofzilla went completely, rigidly still. A heavy, ragged breath tore out of his chest, and then, in the suffocating darkness of the tiny tent, his massive arms wrapped fiercely around me, pulling me flush against his chest as he buried his face in my damp hair. The transition from a freezing, mud-soaked tent to the grand ballroom of the Grandview Summit Resort gave me severe emotional whiplash. We had arrived just as the welcoming gala commenced. Floofzilla had somehow utilized a terrifying corporate concierge service to procure a fresh, impossibly sharp tuxedo within an hour. As we stepped through the gilded double doors, the messy, vulnerable man from the national park instantly vanished. The flawless, untouchable executive was back. His jaw was locked. His posture was rigidly perfect, radiating a suffocating wave of predatory dominance that forced the mingling crowd to immediately part for us. The air in the massive room was thick with expensive champagne and the overwhelming competitive sense of dozens of high-ranking shifters. I, on the other hand, felt entirely like an imposter wearing a borrowed, slightly wrinkled evening gown. My imposter syndrome flared so violently I felt nauseous. Every perfectly coiffed, terrifyingly beautiful shifter in the room was staring at me, analyzing my uncoordinated walk and my completely human scent. Floofzilla's massive hand rested heavily on the small of my back, a scorching, possessive brand of heat. "Keep your chin up," he murmured, his voice a low vibration that barely moved his lips. "You are my guest." They answer to me. "They're looking at me like I'm an appetizer," I muttered, forcing a stiff, terrified smile. Before Floofzilla could reassure me, a waiter carrying a tray of flutes stepped awkwardly into his path. Floofzilla shifted to his right to avoid the collision, turning his bad ear entirely away from my side. In that split second of fractured awareness, a shadow fell over me. A man materialized at my left shoulder. He was tall, wearing a velvet dinner jacket, with eyes the color of pale ice. His scent was aggressive, sharp mint and rotting pine, and it immediately made my skin crawl. "Well, well," the stranger purred, stepping completely into my personal space. He leaned down, inhaling deeply right next to my cheek. The blatant, invasive sniff was a deeply disrespectful violation of pack etiquette. What a fascinating scent. Completely unmarked. A fragile little human, wandering entirely unguarded. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. I tried to step back, but my heel caught in the heavy hem of my gown. Floofzilla spun around, his predator instincts finally catching up. The mask of corporate diplomacy shattered. A deafening, bone-rattling snarl ripped from his chest, entirely silencing the string quartet playing in the corner. His massive frame completely eclipsed the chandelier light as he stepped between me and the stranger, his shoulders bunched with lethal intent. "Step back, Vance!" Floofzilla ground out, his voice dripping with pure, homicidal fury. The heavy scent of cedar spiked, turning violently aggressive. Vance didn't retreat. He merely smiled, a slick, mocking curve of his lips, fully aware that a physical altercation would destroy Floofzilla's pristine reputation in front of the entire conglomerate board. "Just observing, Floofzilla," Vance whispered, his icy eyes flicking to my trembling hands. "It's a shame your lovely pet isn't properly claimed. It makes her look so available." The sheer, lethal violence rolling off Floofzilla's broad shoulders was terrifying. The ballroom held its collective breath. Vance smirked, utterly thrilled by the reaction he had provoked, waiting for the massive CEO to throw the first career-ending punch. My chest seized. I was ruining him. In less than 5 minutes, my complete inability to fit into this polished, ruthless world was going to cost him his empire. I didn't think. I just ran. I yanked my hand away from his possessive grip, picked up the heavy skirt of my gown, and bolted. I blindly shoved through a set of swinging metal doors, the deafening chatter of the ballroom abruptly cutting off behind me. I stood panting in the blindingly bright, stainless steel expanse of the hotel's main catering kitchen. The air was thick with the scent of roasted garlic and vanilla buttercream. The heavy doors violently burst open. Floofzilla marched in, completely ignoring a line of startled pastry chefs. His tuxedo jacket was completely discarded, his bow tie hanging loose, and his dark eyes were burning with a frantic, feral intensity. He locked onto me, his chest heaving as he closed the distance in 3 massive strides. "Don't!" I gasped, backing up until my spine hit a cold metal prep counter. "Floofzilla, you need to go back out there. You're going to lose your board seat over a fake date." "You ran," he growled, entirely ignoring my logic. The heavy scent of cedar crashed over me, completely drowning out the vanilla. He planted his massive hands on the steel counter on either side of my hips, effectively caging me in. "You bolted from my side. You left my perimeter." "I am a liability," I yelled, my voice echoing off the tile. "Look at me. I am a clumsy, bankrupt photographer wearing a dress I can't even walk in. I don't belong in your world, Floofzilla. I am a mess." "I don't care," he murmured, his voice dropping into a dark, ragged vibration that sent a violent shiver down my spine. He stepped directly into my space, his thighs pressing flush against my knees. The blistering heat radiating from him was intoxicating. "My world is suffocating. You are the only real thing I have felt in years." "Floofzilla," I breathed, entirely trapped by his intense, brooding stare. "I am done faking," he whispered fiercely. He didn't wait for permission. His massive hand slid from the counter to my waist, violently hauling me up off my feet. I crashed against his solid chest with a loud gasp, my arms instinctively wrapping around his thick neck as he backed me firmly onto the cold metal counter. His mouth crashed down on mine. It wasn't a polite corporate kiss. It was messy, desperate, and completely consuming. He tasted like expensive champagne and dark amber, his jaw scraping deliciously against my cheek. I kissed him back with equal ferocity, my fingers tangling in his perfectly styled hair, entirely ruining it. We were a chaotic tangle of limbs and breathless, desperate sounds. Floofzilla shifted his weight, his hip aggressively bumping the edge of a massive silver tray. Crash! 36 miniature vanilla eclairs plummeted to the floor in a spectacular explosion of cream and pastry. We violently broke apart, both of us gasping for air. My lipstick was completely smeared across his jaw, and a dollop of white frosting was currently resting on his sharp cheekbone. "Well, well, well," a slick voice echoed from the doorway. Vance stood by the swinging doors, holding his smartphone up, the camera lens pointed squarely at us. "The board is going to find this highly unprofessional, Floofzilla." "We need to move," Floofzilla ground out, aggressively swiping the frosting off his cheek with the back of his hand. Vance was already backing out of the kitchen, his thumb flying across his phone screen. He was alerting the rest of the rival pack executives. The ambush was officially underway. Floofzilla grabbed my hand, his grip tight and completely unyielding. "Stay behind me. I am initiating a tactical extraction." "A tactical extraction?" I shrieked as he dragged me through a side door leading into the employee service hallway. "Floofzilla, this is a Marriott, not a war zone." "They will attempt to corner you to establish leverage over my voting shares," he rumbled, kicking open a fire exit door that spilled us directly onto the hotel's massive open-air mezzanine. "I will not allow them to humiliate you. We are leaving." The mezzanine overlooked the grand lobby. Below us, I could see 4 heavily built men in identical dark suits moving rapidly toward the main stairwell, guided by Vance. They were trying to cut off our exit. Floofzilla's eyes narrowed. He surveyed the architecture with the lethal calculation of an apex predator. The main stairs are compromised. We use the secondary descent. Move. He hauled me toward the glass-paneled escalator at the edge of the mezzanine. He stepped onto the descending metal stairs, pulling me securely against his chest, his broad shoulders bunched, ready to fiercely defend me against the impending corporate attack. There was only one problem. The escalator was currently occupied by a very large, very slow-moving group of senior citizen tourists wearing matching neon lanyards. They were standing 2 by 2, completely blocking the width of the stairs, happily chatting about the hotel buffet. Floofzilla, the terrifying, unstoppable alpha king of the East Coast, abruptly crashed into the back of an elderly woman wearing a floral windbreaker. "Excuse me," Floofzilla barked, his voice dripping with intense urgency. "We need to pass." "Oh, hold your horses, young man," the woman chirped, entirely unbothered, refusing to move her rolling suitcase. "The stairs go at one speed." We were trapped. We were executing a high-stakes dramatic escape at approximately 0.5 miles per hour. The mechanical, rhythmic hum of the escalator mocked the intense, cinematic tension of the moment. Floofzilla let out a low, continuous, deeply frustrated growl. He was physically vibrating with pure, impotent rage. He glared at the back of the floral windbreaker as if he could vaporize it with his mind. "Floofzilla," I choked out, desperately pressing my face into his shoulder to hide my hysterical, inappropriate laughter. "You are literally growling at a grandmother." "She is obstructing a tactical retreat," he hissed, his arms locking protectively around my waist. The contrast between his lethal, protective stance and our glacial, agonizingly slow descent was the funniest thing I had ever experienced in my life. "They're waiting for us," I whispered, peeking over his arm. The escalator was finally nearing the ground floor, but we weren't escaping. Standing in a perfect, imposing semicircle at the bottom of the moving stairs was Vance, flanked by the entire board of directors. The trap was completely sprung. "Stay behind me, Boowolf," Floofzilla commanded softly, his jaw ticking as the final metal stair flattened out. "Do not speak." The silence in the massive marble lobby was deafening. The senior citizens obliviously rolled their suitcases away, leaving us standing entirely alone in front of a firing squad of tailored suits and lethal, icy stares. "A truly embarrassing display, Floofzilla," Vance sneered, stepping forward to address the board. His voice echoed sharply off the high ceilings. "This is exactly what I have been warning you all about. He is unstable. He abandons his diplomatic duties to roll around in a catering kitchen with a uncoordinated, clumsy human." Vance's gaze snapped to me, dripping with absolute contempt. "Look at her. She is terrified. She doesn't belong here, and he is too biologically compromised to realize it. He is entirely unfit to lead the conglomerate." Floofzilla's entire body went violently rigid. A terrifying, chest-rattling roar began to build in the back of his throat. He was going to hit him. He was going to completely destroy his reputation to defend my honor. "Hold my purse." I shoved my beaded clutch directly into Floofzilla's massive chest. He blinked, the roar completely dying in his throat out of sheer, profound confusion as his hands reflexively caught the tiny, sparkly bag. I stepped out from behind him, planting myself directly in front of the towering billionaire. "First of all," I announced, my voice ringing out with crystal clarity, "I am not terrified, I am deeply annoyed. You interrupted a very excellent kiss, which is incredibly rude." Vance's jaw dropped. The board members stared at me in absolute shock. Humans did not speak to alphas this way. "Second of all," I continued, unleashing every ounce of sharp, sarcastic wit I possessed, "if this is what stable leadership looks like, a bunch of grown men trying to corner a woman in a hotel lobby to score points in a boardroom, then your entire conglomerate is a joke. Floofzilla isn't compromised. He's just the only one here who isn't a completely toxic, insecure narcissist." "You insignificant little—" Vance snarled, taking a threatening step forward. Floofzilla's hand clamped down on my shoulder, but he didn't pull me back. He stepped up beside me, towering over Vance, the absolute picture of terrifying, quiet power. The ego, the flawless mask, was completely gone. "She is right," Floofzilla said softly. His voice carried effortlessly across the marble lobby. "I am done playing these ridiculous games." He looked directly at the board of directors. "Vance is trying to blackmail me because he believes I have a fatal weakness," Floofzilla declared, his tone utterly calm. "So, let me save him the effort. I am completely deaf in my left ear. I have zero spatial awareness on my blind side. I suffer from debilitating motion sickness, and a commercial flight leaves me entirely incapacitated." A collective gasp rippled through the polished executives. Vance turned pale, realizing his leverage had just been publicly, effortlessly incinerated. "I am not a perfect, invincible predator," Floofzilla rumbled, looking down at me with a gaze so fiercely warm it made my knees weak. "I am flawed, but I am an exceptional CEO. And if you believe physical perfection is required to run a financial empire, you can have my resignation right now." The lobby fell dead silent. Floofzilla didn't wait for their vote. He didn't roar. He simply turned his back on the most powerful shifters on the East Coast, laced his large fingers through mine, and gently squeezed my hand. "Come on," he murmured, his voice thick with absolute, unapologetic devotion. "Let's go home." I was 90% sure I was on the wrong plane, but the flight attendant had smiled so terrifyingly hard at my boarding pass that I just kept walking. Now, I was dragging 50 pounds of camera equipment down the aisle of a private luxury cabin that smelled like expensive leather and cedar, sweating profusely through my thrifted blouse. I tripped over a wildly plush rug, whispering a breathless, sorry, excuse me," to absolutely no one. Except there was someone. He was sitting in the back, a man so unreasonably massive he made the oversized cream-colored leather seat look like a child's booster. He was poured into a custom charcoal suit, his jaw sharp enough to cut glass, his expression a mask of pure, unadulterated stoicism. He didn't even look at me. He just tipped his head back, rigidly dry swallowing a tiny white pill with a grimace that suggested he was preparing for an execution. I hoisted my tripod case, my voice cracking entirely. "Is seat 4B somewhere around?" He didn't move. He didn't blink. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, wrapping around the cabin until the air literally felt hot against my skin. The sheer intimidation radiating off him was heavy enough to crush my lungs. Finally, he turned his head slowly, leaning slightly to his right, and let out a low, terrifyingly deep sigh. Ding. The pristine chime of the cabin intercom echoed, immediately swallowed by the ominous, violent rumble of thunder outside the window. "Ladies and—" the captain's voice cut out. The floor completely vanished beneath my feet. The plane dropped sharply, and I went completely airborne. The heavy glass doors of the Grandview Summit Resort slid shut behind us, completely cutting off the suffocating, tense silence of the lobby. The cool, crisp mountain air hit my flushed skin, smelling sharply of pine needles and absolute, undeniable freedom. We stood on the Grand Valet curb. I was shivering slightly in my gown, the adrenaline violently draining from my system. Floofzilla stood beside me, his broad shoulders finely relaxed. He was staring down at his massive, lethal hands. His right hand was firmly, possessively engulfing my fingers. His left hand was awkwardly clutching my sparkly, beaded clutch purse. "You can give that back now," I whispered, a breathy laugh escaping my lips. He blinked, looking down at the glittering accessory as if he had entirely forgotten he was holding it. A slow, incredibly devastating smirk tugged at the corner of his sharp mouth. "It complements my tuxedo, Boowolf. I might keep it. It establishes dominance." Before I could formulate a witty comeback, his smartphone vibrated violently in his tuxedo pocket. The smirk instantly vanished. The heavy, dark weight of the corporate world came rushing back. He released my hand, retrieved the phone, and stared at the glowing screen. I held my breath, watching the muscles in his jaw bunch and tighten. The silence stretched, thick and agonizing. He had just thrown away a multi-billion-dollar empire for me. "Floofzilla?" I murmured, stepping closer, letting the heavy, intoxicating warmth of his cedar scent envelop me. "Is it Vance? Did they vote?" He didn't speak. He just slowly turned the screen toward me. It was an email from the chairman of the board. I scanned the brief clipped sentences, my eyes widening with every word. "Floofzilla, your display was highly unorthodox. However, Vance's attempted blackmail demonstrated a catastrophic lack of strategic foresight. The board values transparent, unshakable fortitude above all else. Your human's assessment of our toxic narcissism was regrettably accurate. Vance has been immediately stripped of his voting shares. We expect you in the office on Monday. Bring the photographer. We need new corporate headshots." I gasped, my hands flying to my mouth. "They fired Vance? They kept you?" "It appears," Floofzilla rumbled, his voice dropping into a dark, rich vibration of pure, unfiltered triumph. "That unapologetic honesty is highly profitable." He slid the phone back into his pocket, his eyes burning into mine with a fierce, possessive heat. "And you, entirely by accident, just secured the largest photography contract on the East Coast." I literally yelled at a room full of apex predators. I breathed, shaking my head in absolute disbelief. "You defended your mate," he corrected softly, his massive hands reaching out to grip my waist, effortlessly pulling me flush against his solid chest. "And you were terrifyingly magnificent." The triumph lasted exactly until we reached the airport. We were flying commercial. First class, admittedly, but it was still a metal tube entirely devoid of the massive, custom-tailored leather recliners of his private charter. Floofzilla was currently folded into seat 2A, his knees practically brushing the seat back in front of him. The cabin smelled strongly of recycled air, stale coffee, and jet fuel. As the plane taxied toward the runway, his complexion rapidly cycled from stoic tan to pale to a deeply concerning shade of chalky green. "You're sweating," I noted helpfully, leaning over from seat 2B. "I am perfectly fine," he lied through his teeth. He was gripping the flimsy plastic armrest so tightly the plastic was audibly cracking. "I am a predator. I command the earth. The sky is merely an inconvenience." Ding. The pristine chime of the airplane intercom echoed through the cabin, a terrifyingly familiar sound that made Floofzilla's massive frame violently flinch. "Ladies and gentlemen, from the flight deck," the captain's voice crackled cheerfully over the speakers, "we've hit a patch of rough air, so I'm going to go ahead and illuminate that fasten seatbelt sign. Flight attendants, please take your jump seats." "No," Floofzilla choked out, his eyes squeezing shut. The floor completely vanished beneath us. The aircraft dropped, violently shuddering as the turbulence hit. The overhead bins rattled dangerously, and a collective gasp swept through the commercial cabin. Floofzilla didn't roar. He didn't issue a dark, terrifying alpha command. He completely surrendered. With a ragged, pathetic groan, the towering billionaire CEO violently twisted in his seat, diving over the armrest and burying his face directly into the crook of my neck. His massive arms clamped around my waist in an iron, desperate grip. The blistering heat of his body crashed over me, bringing that heavy, intoxicating rush of dark cedar and amber right into my lungs. I didn't panic. I didn't scramble away. Instead, I calmly reached forward, sliding my hand into the seatback pocket. I pulled out the crisp, white, wax-lined motion sickness bag. I popped it open with a sharp flick of my wrist and wedged it carefully between his chest and my hip, just in case. "I have you," I murmured, wrapping my arms tightly around his broad, trembling shoulders. I pressed my lips firmly against his bad ear, letting my voice soothe the panic radiating from his rigid muscles. "I'm right here. Don't move." Floofzilla buried his face deeper into my collarbone. He inhaled a massive, shuddering breath of my scent, and then, right there in the middle of a commercial flight, surrounded by strangers and terrifying turbulence, the ruthless alpha king of the East Coast began to loudly, violently, and happily purr. The deep rhythmic thrum, thrum, thrum vibrated against my ribs, a hilarious, beautiful declaration of absolute safety. He was entirely chaotic. He was violently motion sick. He was completely, wonderfully flawed. And he was entirely mine.